We initially noticed a fair bit of petechiae on him, and we were extremely concerned with what we had seen. So we brought him to emergency, and at the ER, they initially were suspecting or had some concerns about child abuse. They were expressing some concerns, some questions about that type of thing. Subsequently to that, they had actually completed some blood work and found out that his blood platelet levels were 27,000, and that was extremely low. With levels so low, we had to modify his daily activities, his recess activities, not to go onto climbers. We modified his soccer schedule to protect him, to keep him safe. And in that first year, he was not a bleeder. He had only the petechiae, but never had a nosebleed or never had any type of bleeds of any sort. So after consultation with the hematologist, we determined that they were going to do a watch and see approach. And we would just monitor him and advise them whenever we saw anything out of the ordinary for him.
Within the first year after Luca was diagnosed, his platelets didn't really fluctuate a whole lot, but they did fluctuate somewhat. So they ranged somewhere between below 10 to around 40K. So he did have a little bit of movement, but regardless of the level, he didn't have any bleeding episodes other than just the bruising and petechia. And in the second year, it was more spontaneous. So even if he didn't bump into a wall or something, he would still wake up with bruises and some petechia. But the third year is when things really changed for him. His levels were almost always below 10, so we didn't see that fluctuation anymore. And I would say within the middle, well, in October of 2017, he started to get a lot of nosebleeds at school, and I would say they were happening quite frequently, so his teachers were concerned. And then by the first week in November, he had this epic nosebleed one night, and it was so bad that he had swallowed a lot of blood, so he was throwing up a lot of blood. We weren't able to control the nosebleed ourselves. He had these clots that would fall out of his nose that resembled worms. And after a while, we took him to the ER, and they ended up stopping his nosebleed and then sending us home with some prednisone. When they sent us home with prednisone, we thought that would work, but after a week, we had learned that his levels didn't budge at all. And then he had another really bad nosebleed. So after that second nosebleed, around the end of November, we decided to try the IVIG. And so he was hospitalized for that and had a really bad reaction after that. We were warned that he could have a bad headache, but what he ended up having was something that was worse than a headache. It was more a migraine that hurt all over his head. He literally sat on our couch in the same position. He couldn't move. We tried to lie him down, and it was too painful for him. And we had to turn off all the lights because the light was bothering his eyes. He was throwing up a lot, so we were concerned that the Tylenol really wasn't doing anything for him. And it was a really scary evening for us because we sat there and just watched him suffer. He was not able to speak, so he couldn't really get any words out. He was still talking in himself, but he was starting to get a little out of it, but we just attributed that to his lack of appetite. He hadn't really eaten 2 meals up until that point. And then by the afternoon that day, Luigi went to speak with him, and he was slurring his words. So he was taken to the hospital, and by the time he got there, he had a lot of pressure on his brain, so they were really worried about that. And he ended up having a craniectomy, and he did quite well after that. So they had talked about how he had his left pupil by that time was fixed, and the neurosurgeon came out and talked with us and said normally that's a really bad sign, but after the surgery the pressure was reduced. They felt that they had a handle on it, and his left pupil became unfixed. So she said she was really, she had some hope, and had prepared us for potential personality changes within him, but that, you know, he was going to make it. That was the impression we had. And then throughout that night, things changed, and he ended up having a second bleed, we think, and he ended up requiring another craniectomy, and after that, he wasn't responsive at all. So he was on life support for a couple of days, so we had a chance to be with him, and ultimately the life support was discontinued on the 15th of May. So he was 10 years and 3 months, and it was very hard for us and still is.